Hey everyone, so here's our first critique. This is the black and white paintings. I'm going to be looking at these pretty objectively. We're looking for clear um, value separations in terms of the groups. And I really like to use the value matrix when I'm doing these to try to understand them. A lot of you didn't send the value matrix for me to look at, but that's okay. I hope that we can come to some understanding just by looking at the paintings. I'm going to be grading these based off of drawing and that value separation. It's really kind of just to help me see where you're at in terms of your understanding, and so that's what we're going for. Also, I'm going to be putting your names with the times in the description section, so you can feel free to watch all of the critiques, or you can click through to your time and you can just watch that one. Sometimes I found it beneficial for students to watch others' critiques, so if you're not really quite understanding the value matrix or maybe this first assignment, go through and watch some other people's critiques, and it might shine some light on some of your questions. So anyway, we're going to begin here with Heidi, and this is a really nice, great first painting, Heidi. Overall, the groups are feeling quite nice. The drawing feels pretty good. You get a likeness there. And so most of the critique that I'm going to give at this point is mainly going to be how do we take it further, or how do we refine some of the ideas that are happening in here. So one thing that doesn't help is the photo reference. It's okay, but being so washed out like that, it's hard to work from. And so some of the information you're getting is quite good, but some of it is, you're missing a little bit of information about that. So I'll show you and try to help you to understand where some things might be missing potentially. But looking at it, the overall composition is good. I like the clear focus of the face, the separation of the hair, and the background is all quite nice. We could try to design it in other ways. So in terms of composing in a different way, when we get these different value groups like her shirt down here, if I wanted to bring maybe a little bit more emphasis to her face by dropping her shirt into a different darker group, that kind of gives a little bit more emphasis to her face. I don't know if you can see that, but it takes a little bit of interest away from down here, and we get it up into this face. This is kind of like a Rembrandt style idea where the light or the effect of light is the primary, so we're getting a dropping away or a subduing of the forms as they fall away. We can see that as well if I drop down her neck, then her face is really starting to feel illuminated. And we lose a little bit of that lower interest down there. So also, if I wanted to take that statement even further, I could consider grouping the background into the dark group as well. Because you have these value groups, you can start deciding on where or how they group together, or if they group together. And so sometimes when I have a statement, like I want to make it about the statement in light, so sort of this area here, sometimes I will group the other groups down further or darker, and then I'll get a more dramatic statement. So you can kind of see how those are working towards making this sort of a really dramatic, sort of theatrical spotlight type of lighting. Yours is quite good in terms of the literal interpretation. It looks pretty good in terms of the groups. This is just trying to take it maybe a step further. Maybe I would also just kind of lighten up the top of the shirt. And so I'm getting this effect of light hitting and then falling over the form. So that's an idea. In terms of the composition, that's what I want you to start thinking about, is when you find your groups, is starting to play with them and trying to make a composition that is striking and clear in its purpose. So that's all I'm trying to do there. So let's go on. Looking at it, the overall separation is good. The form is starting to get there, but some of the form is a little flat. So for instance, if we look at the form that's being generated on the face here, this light value, or this middle light value here, it's kind of the same all around. We're seeing some form modeling here on the cheek and a little form modeling here on the nose. But it's pretty flat lit, and that's kind of what I'm seeing in the photo as well. But sometimes, and we'll talk about it more in class, but sometimes I can use a little bit of value as long as it still maintains my light range, and I can use that to help me turn the form. So for instance, finding out where that highlight is generally falling is kind of there on the corner of the forehead, generally speaking. And then we can find that another highlight here on, oops, it went dark. A highlight here on the nose, and maybe on the ball of the nose, and maybe a little bit here on the lip. And so what I'm trying to do is use the little bit of value that I'm seeing and help it to tell the story of, what's happening in the form. So when I see a forehead that is a little too flat, I can turn its form by making it a little bit lighter near that is perpendicular to the light, and then making that value fall off as it falls over the forehead. That can make that forehead feel a little bit more round. So we're going sort of light, and it kind of goes dark over here, but I'm flipping it so that the light is on our side, and that it's weakening as it goes away. I could also maybe use a little bit of that form to describe a little bit more of this cheekbone, so that the planes on the top are the brightest, and then as these planes fall down and around the cheekbone, they gradually get darker, and that can tell us a little bit more story about the form as well. So just using that limited range and trying to tell a little bit more of a story is really what I'm looking for. We haven't really talked about it in the class, and we will, but it's something that you can look for in terms of taking your painting to the next level. Little things I'm seeing as well is the alignment of the features. So in any symmetrical object, there's going to be perspective. So if I were to imagine the head as a cube, right? The eyes are symmetrical, meaning that they're relatively the same left to right, in their placement. The nose is relatively symmetrical on nostril to nostril, and the mouth is symmetrical from side to side, as well as the ears, right? And so what happens is when I turn this in perspective, right, just like a normal box, those features are still going to have the perspective. But what we notice, and this is an extreme perspective to illustrate it, but you'll see this even in little demonstrations, is these lines will have convergences towards the same vanishing point. So they sort of have just like the same structure as a box would follow, is that they're going towards a similar vanishing point in terms of their construction. So if we're looking at the face, we can see there is the same idea in the eyebrows and the eyes and the nose and the mouth and then the chin. And so we're getting a variety of different convergences happening here. It's not to say that they have to be in the same perspective necessarily, but often if I don't know which way to sort of place them, it really helps me to think about, okay, the eyebrows can align with the eyes, and that can be a little bit of a nice structure. For instance, if we look at the photo, we see alignment here, and then we're seeing kind of a similar alignment on the eyes. The nose is going up like this, the mouth is going up like this, and the chin, even though it's pointing down, I can point it towards that same sort of direction. So, because nobody's going to see the reference, but they'll know, basically looking at a painting of somebody that often there's something just a little off, and that can be a perspective thing. So let's go ahead and just kind of restructure the eyes a little bit so that the eyebrows are pointing in the same alignment as the eyes here. Okay, I could even add a little bit of a dark and then soften that light as it comes over here. Okay, so lowering this eyebrow down a little bit and then softening its transition so that it's pointing up generally with the same thing. I can do that same with the nose on this side. I might evidence a little bit more of a nostril. It's kind of getting lost in there, the structure or the bottom plane of the nose. And so I may just indicate, for structure's sake, a little bit more of a bottom plane. And I know, it's not that exactly that way in the photo reference, but maybe we can get away with putting in a little bit more there. And then the mouth as well, we can think of it, instead of just going off of the shapes we're necessarily seeing, we can think of them and then design them to help tell the story of 3 dimensions. So placing the mouth a little bit lower on the left, and then maybe going up slightly on the right can help start to bring a little bit more perspective to the face. Now her head is tilting back. I don't know if that was the pose the whole time, because if I look at it, her in terms of alignment, her chin is lining up with the front of her forehead. And you're getting something quite similar, but if I look at the shapes that are being formed, these sort of positive shapes on the outside, the brow shape here isn't quite the same. It's a little larger, a little bit stronger forehead, and then the cheekbone is sticking out quite far as well. So that tells me that possibly this alignment is right, but maybe these negative or positive shapes are maybe a little bit off. So it's really close, almost to the point where it's negligible. It's like, well, it's there, but it's okay if it's, I change it a little bit. And then in terms of flattering her a little bit, just giving her a little bit more of a chin and ignoring sort of the underbelly, just kind of designing these shapes. I can make them both convex, a little bit, to give them a little bit more structure instead of going concave. But when I'm drawing these lines, I'm thinking the same thing in terms of perspective. Yes, her chin points down, but if I point it up, it doesn't make that much of a difference in terms of her likeness, and it reads pretty nice. So, and then I might, just looking at it, I might carve in a little bit of this forehead. Let's just see, because we knew that shape was a little bit too large because of that, because we used that plumb line and saw that sort of shape being formed. So we might carve off a little bit of this. The hard part often in most 3/4 poses is getting that far side of the face. And this pose might be not exactly as to what you were seeing. Now looking at it, I think I need to bring that out a little bit more. But and so it's just changing ever so slightly, but might be able to get away with that just a little bit. Okay, so trying to help that form go from the left to the right, and then trying to just maybe use a little bit more form to round things, and then looking at perspective, trying just to help shift things slightly in the towards the right perspective. And I'm wondering about the socket here. It feels a little too slanted, maybe. And then maybe I can soften out this edge. Other things I would do: create another group for underneath her chin, that cast shadow. That one looks like it's grouping in with either the mids or the darks, and so it feels like it can separate a bit further. Of course, we're getting some complicated shapes, so I'm not 100% sure where that exactly falls, but we're getting something like that. And then maybe I can get away with a little bit more of a core shadow on her chin to make it feel round and wrap underneath. It's It's kind of the challenge in these sort of flatter lit scenarios that we're trying to show planes as they wrap underneath. Just showing a little bit more structure in there. I think it could be something that could be helpful. And then also up in through here, these edges on the hair are quite hard. I might look to soften them out often because hair is soft and a forehead is somewhat round. That I'm a little wary most of the time if I add too many hard edges, especially on hair lines, anywhere where hair is meeting the skin. It's very soft, and so I tend to go through and just soften it out, even more so than I might be thinking of. So softening and rounding the form, I think is helping a little bit. I might have gone a little heavy with losing this eye socket a little bit, so I might bring it back a little bit, but. Okay, so using those bits of form to help us. Also, we get a plane on this shirt down here. We get a plane change. So the top of this. Let me see. I need a brush. The top of this and the side here shouldn't be represented as the same plane right now. They're the same value, so that to the viewer is telling them that it's the same plane. So we can keep them in the same group. But what I might do, even though you're not approaching that pattern of the shirt, what I might do is just signify, okay, here is the edge of the shoulder, and maybe she has some hair falling over her shoulder. Maybe her shoulder got a little bit smaller. Okay, but what I'm trying to do is show, okay, in terms of structure, that's kind of helping me to analyze that. Yes, this is a top-facing plane, and this is more of a side-facing plane. Same thing through the front. We can get downward-facing planes and upward-facing planes. That just helps the viewer in terms of understanding the orientation of what's happening. We can add some darker darks and things through there, but in terms of form, just trying to maybe make a little more sense out of it. Now this is a little heavy-handed. You'd get some, plaid shirt if that's something that you wanted to go for. And so it's not necessarily going to be, a big one value here and one value here. Of course it's not. But that's the idea in terms of showing the form of the overall subject. Also, there's kind of a glowing effect happening. It feels like she's glowing, and often, and this is going above and beyond, this is not required, but often when you see something glowing, the background, or in this case in the painting, the background takes on a lighter value right around her, and if I do that, it will make her feel like she's giving off a light, which she is. But in this case, it feels like she's almost glowing, and so we can kind of use that around. And so I might take this and darken this down, right? And so darken, 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 and then we start approaching this sort of light emanating, sort of angelic figure, and we get a little bit something, a different approach, but it adds a little bit something. It's softening this transition, some of these forehead transitions. And it gives a little bit of an extra effect. So I kind of like that idea in terms of a picture-making idea. So overall, it's a really nice painting. I kind of want to make her smile a little bit. So we can just take that little donut shape at the edge of the mouth and wrap it up a little bit so that she's a little bit more of a smile. Anyway, this is kind of cheesy, but adds a little something. So anyway, other than that, I think overall the painting is great. I'm not. These are just ideas to maybe take it to another further state. In black and white, it's pretty straightforward, but designing the groups for emphasis, and then possibly using some of those other ideas to round and clean up the form a little bit, and show a little bit more structure. And then the last bit is, softening and giving additional effects that might be interesting. So if I do this one, I might eliminate this. And so yeah, and so we have a statement from kind of here to kind of here. We're getting a little bit more of an interesting, designed feeling thing here. Not necessarily correct, but at least it's a different idea. One last thought I had is looking at it. This socket over here is quite dark, and so it's kind of coming forward. And so I might place a little bit of a darker accent in this eye, and so that might help that work a little bit better. Maybe bring back that darkness in that other eye a little bit. So that starts to help slightly. And now looking at it, I might also include a little bit less face. So it looks like her face was growing a little bit too much back there. So we can do something like this. Yeah, maybe not, but anyway, it's just ideas. So overall, really nice painting. Really liked it. So anyway, there's some ideas to take it maybe to a next level. Play around with those ideas. Don't necessarily need to take it any further. It's going to get a good grade. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions, and let's go on to the next one. And now we're to Zachariah. This is a pretty good painting, Zachariah, considering it's black and white. Okay, yeah, it's very good. Looking at it, there are some interesting things happening. One is your value matrix. It's got a nice breakup, but the groups aren't really clear, and the drawing is almost a little too unrefined to kind of make sense out of it. If that makes sense. I try to identify a little bit more of a shape, and so it really helps if you have like a Sharpie. And so just to show you, if I put a little bit more of a, let me see, why isn't that working? There we go. If I put a little bit more of a shape to these things, so it is supposed to be quick, but if I can make it read just a little bit clearer, I'll have a little bit more of a game plan going into it. And so we see maybe a dark group up here, part of the dark group, and I'm squinting down to try to see these groups. Now I'll grab this one, I'll make it a little bit lighter for a mid group. And I see a mid group on his nose, the side of his face, jaw and neck. And then I see, there's mid group under the collar, and then some dark group under this collar, right? And then another mid group as it goes over here. And then the question is, in terms of composition, would you rather have the shirt be in the light group, or would you rather it have be in a sort of middle group with the rest of it? Maybe it's a light middle, and then when I do that, I start to get a different read. Also, on the hair, would I rather the hair be in a middle group or in the light group? So I'm designing contrast. So in this one, the contrast is kind of everywhere, but when I get a clearer shape to it, I can start seeing, and then when I can start seeing a little bit more clearly, I can start designing a little bit more clearly. So having a middle, light, and dark, I can say, do I want these light areas on the hair to necessarily be in the light group, or do I want them to be in a middle group? And it looks like you went middle group, but in the thumbnail, it's a little bit harder to see. So anyway, that's one step in terms of the assignment, is creating those groups. In the final painting, it looks great. In the value matrix, if you just take a little bit more time and make it a little bit more clear, it can help you. At least it helps me a lot. So looking at the painting, I can see where you're getting some ideas. I see where you're getting your ideas of drawing. I think a little bit is we're going, in terms of drawing, we're going maybe spot by spot, or we're looking at objects in isolation a little bit. I think you're getting, and I'll try to explain that with my painting, but I think overall it's pretty good. But the proportions are getting a little out of whack. I think a little bit, and I'll try to show you that here. But I think that's probably one of the main things. And then the overall angles and alignments that can help. So a few things to look at are, well, it's hard to say because I can see the shapes, but they're definitely there's definitely some skew going on. So if we look at this light shape, let's look at this light shape on him. Now let's compare it to your light shape that you have. So we got a light shape, and then we got the same light shape. So we go there, we go there. And then kind of, it looks like it's going over here. And so you can see fundamentally the shapes are different. If I asked you to draw this one, you might draw something like a Y with a crook at the bottom, and for this one you might do like a really lazy kind of S shape. So they have similar characteristics in that in the final painting they appear very similar, but the shapes are quite different, and I think it has to do with the proportion of the parts. Let's look at another one. Let's look at the forehead shape in light. So this kind of light shape hitting the forehead goes just above the eye. And let's look at this shape. Roughly the same placement thing. So when we look at these shapes, they're fundamentally different, right? So this one is curved on the outside. This one is much straighter. This one has a larger body to it, and this one is a much narrower shape. Let's do one more. Let's and so that's the critical part, is that when you're seeing the shapes, you're interpreting them, right? You're getting the idea, but it's a little too loose. So you're getting close, but it's not quite the right shapes that we're looking for. Let's do this one here. Draw this shape. I'm just drawing the shadow on the nose. So looking at it, we're getting a pretty good idea of what's happening, but you can see this light shape is going out in front of the eye, and let me make, yeah, and your shadow shape is going straight down to the nose, so you can see we're missing this portion, and then we get a much steeper angle in the socket, right? And then a little bit of a bigger body in through the nose. So this is the main idea with drawing, is when you're getting these shapes, and this is something everybody struggles with, including myself, but when we're getting these shapes, we're having to be very particular about every aspect of the shape. Not only are we getting a close approximation of the shape, but we're trying to get that shape, right? So if I'm looking at his forehead, it has to be that shape of the forehead, and or if I'm looking at the nose or the light shape, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So in terms of finding that drawing, I think those are the main kind of issues at this point. Are some of the drawing issues that are kind of getting you. Some really nice things. The shirt, it's fantastic. This looks and feels like a cloth, and you got some nice buttons and some nice light effective shadow. The hair feels pretty good. There's a nice, abbreviated technique there to where it feels like hair without, necessarily doing every strand. So that's good. But I think, well, until we can get the proportions where we need them to be, or the shapes of, the more accurate shapes of where they need to be, then we're going to be fighting for a while. So let's start with a little bit of a paint over here, and let's correct this forehead shape a little bit. So we noticed in that forehead shape that it was flatter when we observed it, and this feels weird now. Looking at your painting and putting in that flat forehead doesn't feel to make sense. But if we continue on comparing our shapes and trying to be a little bit more precise with them, I'm just going to abbreviate this eye here and send this back. We're gonna try to get as close as we can. So as you're drawing this nose, you can see the nose got way big. Let's carve off a little bit of this nose, and then I'm gonna use the light shape to bring it back up. So let's see. So the bottom plane has to come up. This light shape comes into here. We gotta get this light shape working back, and then we got this. So really, in terms of the proportions, I'm really looking at kind of what you had in terms of the eye socket. And when we look at the eye socket, we start to realize that the rest of the proportions are a little skewed, maybe just too long. Got to bring up the mouth, bring up the bottom lip, carve it in, straighten out the chin a little bit, and then I'm rounding the chin and then taking it up and underneath. Now I'm going to try to look at some of these value shapes over here. I think overall the shadow is in the photo is too close in terms of relationship to that of the light. That tells me a number of things. Either there was just too many light sources on the subject when you took the photo, or the photo is just a little overexposed. And I think it's more of the latter. So when I get these groups and I find a shadow on the face, I prefer to make the light and shadow on the face more different, so that it reads a little bit more like light and shadow. So anyway, so let's make this shadow a little bit darker. Let's correct the nose a bit here. Take it in, take it out. Looks like we may even have to move the rest of the face up a little bit more still. Put in a nostril to kind of give us an idea of where the bottom of that nose is. Feels like it's starting to help. Okay. So trying to abbreviate some of these extremes that we're seeing. I think I went a little crazy on the forehead, maybe a little too much carved off, but it's getting a little bit closer. Soften out this core a little bit, and maybe even, get rid of some of that information. And then I might just lower the angle on the jaw. I know it looks super extreme, and it is kind of extreme, but I might just lower it. It looks a little too pointy and a little too unnatural, kind of. And then we have to address this ear. So this ear is above the nose, sort of at the nostril. So if I were to correct it, it would be kind of down here. The shape of it. And really kind of trying to simplify some of the shapes that are happening in there. It looks too like the space is too large. So if I were to, I think that this, to show you, needs to go up here, closer to the head, slightly. And then the hair will match, and then the neck can be taken in, I think, slightly. Yeah. Now our goal isn't necessarily a likeness, but if we're only concerned about value in drawing, then our drawing needs to be on point. So we have a middle group here, so I would probably start by drawing in the parameters of that middle group first. And it looks like you've done pretty good, and then you've kind of worked in some more of those strands. And then I would get this sort of major dark shape, and then the background is actually going to cut off, I think, a bit of the back of his head. And then we get shadow as it comes back here. And then from there, we can add a bit more of the these strands, and then I can grab a little bit lighter version of the hair and add a little bit more of the shapes I'm seeing in through there, if that's something you want to go for. But and then soften out maybe some of these darks. Okay, but really just trying to pay attention a little bit closer to the shapes as they're happening. Being a little bit more careful. Of course, this is and here I am just trying to blow through the whole thing, but it is important to take your time in observing the shapes that are happening. They're all really important, so that's an abbreviated version. So, and now it looks like I carved off a little bit too much of the back of his head. Might bring it back out just a little bit. Yeah. And we're getting this, and then maybe his neck can come back out. And so really what I'm looking at is between here and here, we're getting it closer to where I want it to be. Now let's look at an alignment on the edge of this nose. It goes up to the front of the socket. Yeah, that's pretty close. And then we get a little bit of a smaller mouth that does not go past the edge of that. Okay. And then looking at it, there's a lot of contrast in the shirt, so I might, like I showed in the value matrix, have brought all the values down a little bit in that group so that the focus is more up on the face rather than on the shirt, if that makes sense. I'm getting a lot of contrast now in this hair. I might have gone too bright, so I might knock it down too. And that feels already a little bit better in terms of grouping. Could probably bring back a little bit of the light area just to keep it from going way too dark. Okay, and then it's just a matter of refining and using edges to tell the rest of the story. So if we come in here, just there's a bunch of texture and things happening in the shadow side that I don't think we need. In the neck, all of this stuff should have a relatively soft edge because it's in shadow, and shadow just within there loses a lot of its contrast. And so if I'm going to affect it in any way, I tend to make it a little bit softer edged. That tends to help. So, yeah, there's drawing we can do in and around the shirt, to make it to correct a little bit of the collar and things like that. But that's not really the point of what we're trying to do here. Is get a little bit clearer in terms of the drawing and value. So, overall, that's kind of my first take and pass looking at it, is looking at the shapes. They're close and they're getting good, but it takes a little bit closer observation as to their proportion and as to alignments. Right? There's only a few things that we need to do. We can measure, align, use positive, negative shapes, and linear perspective. If we do those things, our shapes will get more and more correct. And so it's size, placement, and literal shape that we're looking for. So, and then all the rest is just kind of composing in terms of values, in order to make it look nice, or get the viewer to look where we want them to look in the end result. And so that would be like lowering the value of the shirt to make the face read a little bit more directly. So overall, I mean, it's a nice painting. You're getting the value group idea. I think in terms of drawing, it needs to improve. But that'll just come with practice, and really practicing it what you're trying to do. So let me know if you have any questions. That's kind of what I'm looking at for this. We can go further and take the drawing further, and refine some of these shapes, like in and around the mouth, and try to get it more correct. But this just repeating the idea of trying to get this accuracy in your drawing. So that's the main idea: is keep practicing your drawing. Look more particularly at the shapes that you're seeing, and be as precise as you can. Make them the right size, get all the right angles, and be very particular, and that will take your drawing to the next level. So let me know if you have any questions. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, and I believe this one is Holly. This is a nice one, Holly. It looks pretty moody. There's a lot of drama and values in this value separation. So there's the values in dark on this face have gone really quite dark, and then it's contrasted by these really nice light shapes. But one thing I'm noticing is that the value separation could be a little bit clearer, meaning that some of the values that are happening in light appear a little bit like the values happening in the mids, and then the mids are looking kind of like the darks, and so there's a little bit of clarity that we can bring to the groups by simplifying down the variety we're seeing in there. So to show you that, the drawing's looking good as well. I might as well say that. Drawing's looking good. You get a pretty good likeness. There's some drawing things I'll point out to you so we can get on the same page, but overall, I think the values can be adjusted into groups a little bit more, and then we'll look about drawing. So, what do I mean? In the light group, you're getting some nice form turning here, but the transitions and the variety that you're getting in there is a little much. So, and I know this is working from a photo reference, so I'm getting rid of some of the information that you might have had in life. But if I were doing this and trying to steer these guys into groups, this is probably what I would be doing even if I had all the information right before me, is I'm trying to eliminate unnecessary values and unnecessary information in lieu of getting stronger groups. So, for instance, just joining that light group together a little bit more, we get rid of some of that over modeling where it kind of looks a little bruised maybe, or there's too many value variations within there. And then we can do the same thing in the shadow. So we're going to group together the lights, and we're going to try to group together the shadows a little bit. And I'm going to group together the values down here on the neck. Group together the values here on the ear, right? And then maybe even clean up some of these in their sort of middle value. I might group them together and put them in a group as well. There's quite a bit happening through there. But you can start to see how the values are starting to work together to give me a clearer read overall of my of my subject, and so it's becoming clearer. Like sort of like those golden age illustrators, those images we were looking at. They're so brutally clear, and they're beautiful. I think they're just gorgeous. But it all comes down to limiting the amount of information to have that impactful statement. And so we can do the same thing on the hair. If I wanted to, the hair's looking pretty good, but if I wanted to separate the hair from the skin, if I make the highlights just group down with that hair, you can see how much more clearly the face reads. And so let's go boom to boom. It just reads a bit more clear. And so that's the idea of trying to, find those groups and then keep them a little bit more separate. Now, we've lost a lot of modeling, and so we might need to come back in and, add a few darks, which is important, to turn form, but we don't want those darks in areas where it's not really, it's kind of turning form, but not really. So also, this makes the painting process a lot easier, and it makes it a little bit more fluid as I work through. The information I'm putting is helping the image rather than hurting. Looking at it as well, I think we can add a little bit more variety in the value of the shadows. It looks like we're going a little too dramatic everywhere in the shadows. So to illustrate that, what I'll show you is if I take this side plane of the nose, and I'm squinting down to see it, it's in that dark group, but it's the lighter end of that dark group. That I can kind of eliminate some of that overly dark areas in there, and so I'll just push them down a little bit, and that will give you a little bit more nuance, and it will feel a little bit more like a painting from life rather than something that might have been painted from a photo. So I'm eliminating a little bit of that drama. But it's in lieu of getting a little bit more of a naturalistic lighting scenario happening there. So I haven't done much in terms of the drawing. All I've done is group together the values and then got the relationships a little bit closer, in terms of where my lightest dark is and where my darkest kind of dark is. So we're seeing some real light passing into these, these darker areas. So it's kind of, it's a really soft edge through there, and we're going to get a little bit more of a feeling of flesh if we, and skin if we adhere to that. So I'm eliminating maybe too much at this point, but I'm trying to just show you the point. So let's look here. So you can see how I've eliminated the drama in those areas, the variety that it was unnecessary, and then I'm setting up my standards, and I think it's helping. Also, let's talk a little bit about drawing while we're here. The drawing's looking good. One area that we can start to point out is the nose. The nose is such a structural element on the face that if I can find plane separation a little bit more clearly and put that in my painting, I can give a lot of structure to the whole face. So what do I mean? Finding this bottom plane and making it sort of a stronger representation, getting that correct is really kind of important. So I think I can get a little bit more evidence of a bottom plane here. And then we can soften out the edges a little bit. Right? That can help us give a little bit more structure to the face than the nose sort of pointing down and the values getting a little overexposed there. So it tilts his nose up a little bit and then gives us a little bit more of that structure. So that'll help through there. Let's also soften a little bit on the lips. And the lips are an interesting area. They're barely darker than the rest of the skin tone. But they do get those really nice highlights on them, but You have to be careful with the value and the drawing of the lips. Although they're very soft, it's kind of the second area people look to when looking at a person. They look at the eyes first and then the mouth, often because you're talking to somebody. So that's looking pretty good overall. Maybe improve a little bit of the specific drawing in and around the eye socket here. Giving a little bit more evidence of an upper lid on the top, and then possibly, that I know this isn't probably the same lighting condition that you painted from the whole time, or even when you were even just painting the eyes, but sticking to the photo reference, I think we can show a little bit more evidence of those lids, and it will help us get a little bit more of a likeness. Okay, so overall, those are my main critiques that I'm looking at for this week. Value grouping, and then getting your standards in terms of value to help you, start to make it feel a little bit more like a sense of life, a little bit more sense of a person being lit, Now he's getting, yeah, now I kind of remember the pose wasn't very consistent. This guy kept moving, I think. And so the neck was kind of like hard to shoot for, kind of thing. But anyway, that's kind of the ideas that I'm thinking for this post. So looking at the beginning to after, just that value grouping, limiting the amount of values I place in an area to help with the form, and then just setting up my standards. Not making all the shadows, the same, but looking for that lightest and that darkest within that group. That can help you to start rendering as well. Now, if I were to finish it, I would probably take and put in a little bit more of a highlight information. So here on the corner, where the front part of his forehead meets the side. Then we see a corner of the nose. Maybe that's a little too soft and a little too weird. And then maybe a little bit of information in and through his upper lip. Just refining some. Anyway, there's some ideas for you. Let me know if you have any questions. It's a nice painting. It's just a matter of taking it and simplifying your approach just a little bit further. Okay? All right, let's go on to the next one. And then we have Blakeley. Yeah, this is great, Blakeley, as always. You have a really nice way of, working on a painting. Coming back from a break can always be hard, but it doesn't seem like you really struggle too much with this painting, so it's great. Looking at it, I think we can shoot for a little bit more of a value separation. It looks like you had quite a good reserve in terms of the lighter end of the spectrum, the light end of the values, which is, I think you could use a little bit more of that budget to make your halftones or the skin tone and light just a little bit lighter. But I'm really loving the form and the feeling of the hair. That's feeling great. The drawing looks pretty good. You're getting a pretty good likeness. And so I'll try to do a little bit more of a designing, kind of for the value in light, and then a little bit of drawing, and then I think this one, it's already great, but let's see what we can do. So looking at it, we can maybe strive to have, a little bit of a lighter value in these direct light. So let's just see what we can get away with. I'm gonna paint it in really kind of strong and then pull it back a little bit just to see what the where it needs to go. So I'm going to paint it in way light. So painting it in way light, paint it in way light. And it's not to say that you need necessarily to follow the values that you're seeing from life. He had a very light skin tone and light, but it is to say that maybe we can play around with just a little bit more contrast. Pushing the lights just a little bit lighter, and sticking through there. So now let's pull it back a little bit. Let's go through there. And then let's erase out a little bit of it. It probably went too light down there. And then maybe a little light down here. And so, although it's not really working at this point, the idea that I have is that in order to, design this image, I'm kind of trying to get a little bit more separation just out of my groups. So by putting the face just a little bit lighter, we get a little bit more of a luminosity, we get a little bit more of a clearer statement, or a little bit different feeling. This is kind of a little bit more moody. This feels a little bit more illuminated, so it's just an idea. Let's see if we can't take it and push some of those lights into the rest of these areas. So although his sockets are in a middle group, parts of them are transitioning into those lighter areas, so I'm just trying to push a little bit more variation in light into those as well. And then maybe and possibly taking the nose and sending it up lighter. Just sending it up just a little bit. Now, I don't know that this is absolutely working, but this is kind of something I found, and and in studying with Susan Lyon, and she says that most of the time people make the halftone in light too dark. And most of the time it's the reason of preserving for highlights. And not to say that one way is better than others or anything like that, but there's like some really great painters like Richard Schmid and Susan Lyon, who was a student of Richard Schmid, and they'll often say don't paint highlights, and I often find it's a little odd, but in what they're trying to get at, I believe, is maintaining stronger separation between my groups. And so sometimes that means my light group sacrifices the read of the highlights a little bit to have a stronger read with the rest of the groups. And so that's something that I might consider. By making it lighter as well, we're also separating it from the shirt. And I see how you put them in the same group, which is great, but compositionally I might want them to separate a little bit just so that the face reads a little bit. Just an idea, I don't know. Okay, now let's go to a little bit of drawing. So looking at the drawing, it's quite nice. The main thing where I think he might be getting lost in terms of likeness is the jaw. The angle on the jaw is feeling a little, where it turns is generally up by the ear, and he's kind of at a weird pose. He's kind of leaning back, but often if I can find that ear, I try to put that turn or that corner of the jaw up by that ear, and often that will give a little bit more structure, and it feels a little bit more natural that way, most of the time. So that jaw, shifting it from turning down here to turning up more by the ear, is getting us a little bit more of a likeness, I think, and helping that out a little bit. Also, we're getting the size of the features, so the size of this eye and the size of this eye are looking a little close, and it's also the far side of the face is getting a little too big. And so you can look at the space between the nose and the cheek, and that relationship to the actual nose itself, and that space is less than the distance of the nose. And here you're getting less than the distance of the nose, but I'm feeling like it's a little too big still. So let's just see. Let's carve in this forehead, because that's all kind of part of the same the same line or the same side of the face. And then let's carve in just a bit more of this cheek here. And then I'm going to try to give it a little bit more articulation in terms of the anatomy. So on the face, there's a muscle that surrounds it, and you'll see this often. It'll manifest in the form of a bump, and you can kind of see it here. That muscle often sticks out off the face like that, and so when I see it, I can articulate, the side of the plane of his face to have or to reflect that little bit of anatomy. And it's very slight, but it can really help in terms of making that feel a little bit more correct. So if we do something like that, carving in that side of the face, we're adding that bit of anatomy. It's very slight. You can definitely overdo it, and I'm almost overdoing it, but you can see where it goes soft all the way down. We can articulate that side, and we can get a little bit more of an anatomical based line. Vince Bodley, Brother Bodley, would always say it's complexity on the contour, and I believe in that now. I didn't believe in it as a student, but I kind of believe in it now. So anyway. I'd also maybe breathe a little bit more light into some of these darker bits. You've got that dark group, but we can afford to maybe make it a little bit lighter so it has a little bit more luminosity to it. And then I question adding any extra lights. So like taking and putting in just a little bit brighter, not that bright, but just a little bit brighter of a light on the hair. For form's sake, so just taking it and then adding, it's not as bright as the skin tone, so it still separates, but just a little bit more, just to show a little bit more form. I think you are already kind of getting into that idea, but just softening some of this stuff. That'll get us a little bit more of a form on the hair without sacrificing too much. And so if we look at the beginning to the end, just a little bit lighter group or a bigger separation between your groups, and then just a little bit of drawing and a little bit more of some subtlety through there. I think that's probably what I would. Those are the adjustments I would make to bring it to a different level. Yeah. Looking at it as well, I might also add a bit more form on this collar. Now, the value here is all pretty much the same, but I know that this collar is kind of turning and going around behind. And so often what I'll do is add another step in value on the edge of a form, and that will help it to feel like it's actually turning over. And that tells us something about the back of this figure. So his neck is turning and this collar is turning, and together we get a better sense of the form of what's happening in and through there. Okay, so we go from kind of flat to turning that form, starts to feel a little bit more like a believable sense of space. So overall, I mean, it's killer. I can't wait to see what we're going to do this semester. I'm really excited to see the paintings that you're going to produce. So if we look at the beginning to the end, I mean, these are little adjustments. You're already off and running and doing some great work. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. We'll leave it there, and if you have any more, just let me know. And let's go on to the next one. Okay, and this is Dasha, I believe. Yeah, I think this is Dasha. Just looking good, Dasha. Looking nice in terms of the value grouping in the drawing. You're getting a pretty good likeness out of the model. I know this model was particularly hard because he kept moving and he had a really weird pose. But it's looking good. You're getting some clear distinction between your groups, which is pretty nice. I think we can go for a little bit more subtlety and a little bit more drawing in some of these groups. So let's start by looking at your value matrix. Yep, it reflects pretty well. Let's add some darks. I think you already have a pretty good dark range, but if you notice, if I put in these darks and give it a little bit more edge information on this side, I think part of the problem is you go very soft, which is good. It's actually a really positive thing to go too soft. I think most people just tend to go too hard, but at the same time, it's not fully where we want to be. And so either in the face it's too hard, and on the outside it's really really soft. So we have to find some kind of dynamic, and I often try to find variety in any line. So on the interior, I'm trying to find a variety of hard and soft, and often interior face is softer than the exterior or the edge of form. And so we kind of need to flip that a little bit. But now that we got that dark kind of established a little bit, I think it was dark. It just dried a little bit light or whatever. We can start looking at some of the values that are happening on the inside. So now that we have our dark, we can see that these values are working pretty good. Before, these were the same values, and so we were lacking a bit of contrast, between them in the reference and from life. His eyes were the shadows on his eyes were far lighter than the ones on his hair, and so we need to get that accurate relationship that's between them. And so I just need to push a little bit darker. If you can't get it any darker, then these guys have to go a little bit lighter. And I think as well they already need to go a little bit lighter. So let's go ahead and do that. They're not, even though we have a shape that's in the group, the whole shape isn't necessarily, for instance, like the eye sockets, they're not necessarily all the same value. And so we have to find the variety within them. Or even the eye sockets, they're all pretty dark, but they're not all in the dark group. Not all the parts of them are in that dark group. So we just need to lighten them up a little bit. And this could be due to camera exposure. That's kind of the thing I'm noticing. Is so when we look at something like the bottom of the nose, we can breathe a little bit more life into that bottom plane, and then our nose is going to sit under there. It feels like maybe, now looking at it, it may have gone a little too light with that passive value. That's a little too dark, so we're going to have to try something else. Well, we'll just leave it there for now, and then if we need it to change, we'll change it when we come back. Now, drawing wise, it feels pretty good, but we're getting some structural stuff that is kind of throwing me for a loop a little bit. So for instance, his eyes are going this way, eyebrows are going this way, nose are going this way, mouth is going this way, right? They're all kind of converging or going parallel. And we get his eye here, oops. His eye here is pointing this way, and this eye is pointing this way. So they're not really aligned yet, and I kind of see that, what you did there. And then his nose is kind of going this way, his mouth is kind of going this way, eyebrows are going this way. So you can see the structure of the head isn't quite aligning. And so I tend to try to force it to have a little bit more alignment. So even if my eyes are telling me that the eyes aren't quite aligning, unless it's critically important to his character that his eyes don't align, like a Bill Murray character or somebody like that who has interesting eyes that just don't align, and it's important to making it look like them. I'll include that, but otherwise I make them point at each other, in terms of their alignment, and that tends to help quite a bit. I need to fix the value down here. And then the mouth, we can put this left side up higher, and this left side down a little bit lower, right? And so that will start to help with the structure of the head. And so when I start thinking of that, it no longer becomes a question on things like a chin. I can point it in the same direction as the other features, and that can help me to start getting that alignment without, relying on the model for literally every line or everything like that, because I know that the structure, because it has symmetry, is going to have to align. Or if it does align, it feels more accurate. So that's getting closer to his likeness, and I'm just using basic structure to help me guide it, there. It's interesting how if I use the standard proportions and the standard ideas generally used in drawing or painting heads, that it actually gets closer to a likeness than if I were trying to rely solely on the model. It's kind of it's weird, you know. It's kind of frustrating that that is the case, but often it does really help, and that's something I rely on all the time when I'm doing paintings is how much do I know about the model, and then letting that influence what I'm seeing on the model. So separating that dark under there into a new group is giving a little bit more contrast in on the neck. And then I can put that trapezius a little bit lower. Maybe not. Maybe I'll make it more at a steeper angle. I think I helped you with that, but I went and messed it up, so you can blame that one on me. And then we need we need to soften some of these edges through here. So just going through and softening up. Okay. It looks like there's a lot of bits of form happening in and around his chin, and you can introduce all those small shapes if that's something that you feel that you need to do. I like to add a few of them sometimes, but I think over modeling anything like that, like adding too much value information down there, makes it about his chin, and it draws our eye down there. And I tend not to make people want to look at chins. I tend to try to get them to look at the eyes or somewhere else. So, and now we need an upper eyelid that's lighter, and then we need an upper eyelid that's lighter. So I'm just looking for that nuance now. A lot more of that subtlety to edge and drawing, and it will always make kind of the difference between a good painting and a great painting. I think, at least, is that subtlety, that attention to detail that will take it and make it feel more believable. Okay. So it's just softer and a little bit of drawing, and looking at it, I think we could probably do with. Feels like this hair, this dark over here is quite oppressing. It's a little too dark, and so I wonder if I introduced it and evened out some of the darks on the other side, if that would help. And then maybe put in a hard edge or two over here. You know, something like that. You know, just taking it and you know, refining it, trying to treat it like a full portrait. I don't know if that helps so much. It's a little dark. It does help in terms of clarity a little bit, but I'm not sure I would do that in my own painting. Not sure. What I would do, I don't know why I won't. Oh, there. What I would do is soften some of these edges on the neck, and then on the edge here on the shirt, try to just give a little bit more of a definite drawing. You know, where there's the change in plane is supported through a change in direction of my line. So the collar goes down, and then it meets the shoulder, and it goes straight out. If I just kind of softly merge them like that, it's not as clear. And then let's put a little bit more form here on the edge of this collar, and that collar will then start to wrap around the neck like it does. So that's kind of supporting what I know kind of know what's happening over there. We can also soften out just the edges, just slightly, and that can help to make that form read a little bit more. It also feels a little too big overall. So if I go and then I move this guy over, it's feeling closer. Feels like that collar actually fits his shirt a little bit closer. So if I do this, brush, and I even this out, and then I even this out. Oops. And then I take the collar. I'm just making it a little bit smaller, but I think that collar could have just gone in a little bit, than be a little too large. Okay, so that's kind of the ideas that I'm looking at. Is you've got nice separation, and that's really what the assignment is about. And then the drawing is a matter of I'm keeping my clear separations. This is still separating from that group, but it has variety within that group to make it feel a little bit more illuminated. So going from sort of drastic, a little too dark, to a little bit closer. Maybe we can even soften up that plane of the nose a little bit as well. So once I get my groups, then I can use them to help build up that variety and show the form, and that's kind of what we're looking at. So I think I might also make this shape a little bit bigger. Separate, and then get some darks in his ear. Something like that, and then maybe put a little bit more of a light through here. I don't want to draw too much attention to the ear, but if I don't bring anything to it, then it just feels kind of unfinished. So just a little bit more for rendering or whatnot. So even though it's not the focal point, it needs a little bit of attention. So something along those lines. So that's what I'm looking at there. So a little more subtlety, a little bit of drawing, and that's kind of where we're going. So overall was already really, really nice. We're just trying to get closer likeness, closer subtlety, and then just a little bit of drawing. I think still on that neck though. Yeah, okay. Well, whatever. Let me know if you have any questions. It's really nice. And let's go on to the next one. Okay, and this is Carolyn. Carolyn, pretty good. Looks like you did what was asked of you to get the values separated and to make your groups, which is looking good. I think there can be a little bit more separation in your groups, and then just drawing. So looking at it, the hair and the face need to separate a little bit more. The shadow on the face is the same value as the value on the hair. We're getting a nice dramatic statement out of this light, which if you're doing a two-value statement, which it kind of looks like you are, that's interesting, and it was well worth it. But I think we can get a bit more variety out of if this is my two-value statement. I want to make my darkest darks be over here. So I'm going to start by darkening up the hair altogether. There. There. Right. And so now I've got it's still the darkest end of the dark group, but it almost feels like another group, so that's okay. Now, what do I need to do is then separate my middle group a little bit more. So I'm going to make this shadow on her skin be just a little bit lighter. What you'll start to feel is when I push that light into that area, the values just start to make a little bit more sense. Starts to feel a little bit more illuminated, and so that's and then it starts feeling a little bit more like skin, and then a little bit more like hair. So I can also use this dark range that I found to draw in some of these darker features. Now it's not as dark as the hair, but it's not as light as the skin. But it's definitely falling, somewhere in between. But I'm going to use it to help me draw in the rest of these parts here. goes underneath the socket. And then we get a softening. And then we get a little bit of a dark over there, and then a little bit larger of a socket maybe. But then this is taking on the character of that ambient light over there, so we're going to lighten that up. I'm getting that drawing. And then I get this value slightly through here on the core. I don't want to overdo it. Definitely don't want to overdo it. But I'm just gonna send it just a little bit darker and a little bit lighter. Something like that. So kind of overdid it there. Got to pull it back. And so that's giving me just my value separation that I'm kind of looking for. So doing something like that. Aha. So that starts to feel a little bit more organized and a little bit more like a sense of light. You could also see that this middle value can come up and be the light end of my hair. So I'm getting clever in my groups and trying to make my mids my light darks, and then I can use a little bit of it through here. There's definitely some lighter group on the hair, but I can start to try to design through the use of that middle group. And then I get this darker middle. I get something like that. We can also start to turn the form through softening these edges. I don't really want to do this until I'm confident in my value groups and I know exactly where I'm taking them, but at some point I can start looking at edge variety, and it really starts helping the form feel modeled. So we go through here, and we can soften out some of these edges. Okay. Just getting a little bit more modeled. A little bit more form. Using that. Draw the orbicularis oris. And it's very slight on her, but I can put it in. And then I can draw a little bit more of a chin, a little bit of a straighter chin, and that can often be a little bit more flattering, if that makes sense. Okay, so something like that. Okay, and then we see a bit of the lighter end of the spectrum on the hair. So through here, let's make it bigger. Boom, boom, and then boom, boom, through there, and then maybe a bit of it on the edge of the hair. We're just getting that highlight, then I'm going to soften this edge quite a bit. Okay, so although it's it's not a big difference, finding and isolating those groups and making them different, I think is bringing some clarity to the image, and it kind of helps, in terms of rendering or modeling once you get into that. But it especially helps when you start getting the color and things like that. So anyway, try to keep your groups organized. Make them distinct, so like hair and the face, make them different and see what you can do with that. And then in terms of drawing, just go in and start preserving the edges. The drawing's looking good overall. I don't see anything that's jumping out as being wrong. It's just a matter of getting your value groups and making them work for you. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. It's looking really good. If you were to finish it out, do those adjustments, and then maybe also paint it up all the way to the edges. Not everywhere, but just eliminate a little bit of this blank canvas. That can be a nice finishing step for that painting as well. So just something like that. So anyway, really nice stuff. Let's move on to the next one. And now we have our two. Who was this? This is Victoria, that's right. This is Victoria's. Looking good, Victoria. Not much to say. Value loops are looking good. A few things I would do is just adjust the drawing a little bit in order to eliminate a little bit of thing, and then also add a little bit more contrast in a few areas. So your groups are looking great. There's nothing to complain about there. I like this darkening on the front. I think that that's the idea for the overall design or composition. It being limited to just in front of her face, I wonder about that. Maybe you could design it to have a little bit more of a shape, kind of thing. Kind of a lead-in shape. And then maybe so it's a little bit, of an idea of it's flowing through and around her head. Maybe I'd do a shape like this, and it kind of comes down like this. I don't know. You can play around with the shapes. I feel like this is a good, and that's the idea. But maybe play around with how you get it there to build some interest. Maybe I go through here like this, so it's kind of a bigger continuation of an idea. So it's kind of this darkening, and it's going, it's flowing us through the painting. That could be an interesting compositional idea. Just to, it's just a study, but composition is always there, whether it's a study or a serious painting. So it's something to think about. So anyway, in terms of drawing, there's some really tiny things. I think her forehead still a little large. To show you, if I paint in that light shape for her forehead, and I don't quite know where her hair is, but we'll just take it up there, and her forehead over here, just take it over, you're getting a very similar shape. It's really quite good, but the proportions, this light shape feels skinnier to the height than this one. And so that tells me something about the drawing in terms of the shape. And so I might just take the dark and pull the forehead back a little bit. Maybe take the soft core here, maybe move it up just a little bit. And I think that's helping a little bit. Maybe not all the way up there. So I do this, soften it back a little bit. So just getting it a little bit closer to what we're looking for, and then maybe even softening this brow a little bit further. It's feeling a little hard-edged, and then it gets way soft in the transition from this atmospheric or reflected light and the socket. So you got those groups, and you're definitely seeing that separation, but we need to see how they come together a little bit, and I think that's where I would go with that one. I'd also add a bit more of a darker accent under her nose, and I think I went way too far there. Let me try doing this. I put it in. I'm going to put it in darker than it is, and then I'm going to pull it back a little bit. See if that's helping. So you've done a really good job in terms of finding your groups and keeping them separated, but now I think you can look inside of those groups and find where other groups. So within this dark or this middle group, you get a dark group because it's grouping to that hair, and so that's might be where I would take that. And then I would also possibly take the value of this socket and bring it down just a little bit as well. And that's a little too far. Just barely taking it down. It looks like maybe just still a little too far. There you go. Something along those lines. I can also try to shape her lip, I think, a little bit. Shape this lip a little bit. And then looking at it, this edge on this chin is looking quite nice, but I might try to soften it. It feels like a razor's edge all the way down, and the chin, for one, is a very round sort of anatomical structure on the face. And so if I keep its edge just a little bit softer, I can start to communicate that a little bit more. So we're looking there. And as I look at things like the hair, I mean, it's looking great. Maybe adding, a few of these darker accents. It's a little heavy. Okay. And a little bit more. Just a few through here, I think can take this hair to another level. Just you don't want to get carried away with them because they start breaking up the group. But I think a few more could be nice. And then it looks a little. This reflected light looks a little suspicious as being a little too light, and so I wonder if I can take it down a little bit. Yeah, you see how that sends that back into that group? I know there's a reflected light in there, but I might just send it down just a little bit to keep it a little bit more grouped. Okay. And so, let's put that background back in there. Just kind of that idea. Taking it all the way back. And you can see how a little compositional idea, like this, kind of using a line. I gotta keep it on the painting, but using a line can help serve more than one purpose, right? So it's taking away some of the interest that the back of the head is holding. You see how that's a contrast back there where the head is getting some attention, but by using this compositional device, I'm actually bringing it more to the front, and it's also helping this hair not get lost. So I don't necessarily want the light to get lost here, and I don't want the back of the head to have all that information. So I put them together, and it starts to read a little bit better. Okay. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm seeing for this painting. So little nuance and a little bit more attention to barely any drawing. So there's a little bit of a of a forehead deal going on, a little bit more of a darker accents, and adding a little bit more interest into our focal area, and then using this compositional tool to help keep us in where we want to go. So anyway, really great stuff. Let me know if you have any questions. This is a killer painting, and and let's go on to the next one. And so now we're to Eden, I believe. Nice painting, Eden. Overall, I think it reads pretty well. You're getting some nice drawing going on. You got a likeness. Overall, it feels like there's not enough separation in the value groups, and or enough of a separation, and then the edges feel quite hard everywhere, sort of geometric. He feels like he's cut out of stone, which is kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie, but for a sense of skin, to make him feel alive, we want to. Let me see if I can. Anyway, we just want to round and soften those out. So the first thing I need to do is start by separating my groups a little bit more. So your dark group can go a bit darker. So use that budget. You don't have to make it black, but the darker I go in my dark group, the more room I have in my other groups to render form and make a little bit more of a designed image. And so this being my dark group, I see it go all the way around his head. Now I don't know if this is a compositional choice on your part to make the dark group a little so light, but I think we can get away with just a bit darker. So you can see I'm not using necessarily black or really as dark as I can go, but it is quite a bit darker, and that's just to try to get clarity in the groups. So I get that dark, I get that dark. Get all of that dark group in there. We get a dark group in here, and we get a dark group under here. So just a darker group. It starts to align a bit better with the reference, or with the model, and so I feel good a little bit with that. And it gives me a bit more of a range. Okay, let's add a middle group. That's a little bit darker as well. So you can see in these, let's grab this guy, right, so all this kind of grouped together, this lid, this bit through here, let's just darken it all up. Let me grab a different, there we go, brush. Let me try that again. Actually, let's do a different layer, and that way I can pull it back if I need to. So just drawing in, I'm putting it in way darker, and then I'll pull it back with Photoshop. It's just the fastest way. If I were more careful, we could do this. I could show you every step, but it would be more in kind of this range. So we see that. You see, not necessarily the shirt. It can be in its own range. And then the hair, I might group those down into the same group. Looks really light, but I want it to separate a little bit more from the skin. So there we go. And then in the light group, I think we can work in a little bit more variety. So it's quite bright in the light end of the spectrum, or the lighter end of the light group. Then we can use a little bit of a darker light as we move down the form. So all of these can go, a little bit darker as he moves down the form. So just to show you, I'm kind of avoiding any details at this point, just because I'm just trying to get the value groups to start working a little bit stronger. Something like that. And soften out some of these edges. Okay, so we're getting a little bit more ranges between our groups. I haven't done anything in drawing yet, but I'm trying to first start by getting these groups. That's the most important. Anyway, And then the shirt, I would probably, let's do it in a new group, send it down and make it darker as well. The whole thing can just go a little bit darker, I think, just so the reed belongs on the face. Right? I can clean it up a little bit. You know, something like that. So the reed or the design goes away from the shirt and goes back up to the face. That's kind of what I'm looking at or looking for. Okay, and then just kind of keep that forehead bright, and then the values sort of drop off as they move away from the source of the light. Okay, so looking at it, let's look at these. I'm going to turn them all off and then turn it back on. We're getting a little bit more drama in our statement, and we get a little bit wider variety of value in there. This one is not bad. It's the same groups, but they lack the contrast or the separation we need for that clarity. And so by putting that in, we get a little bit more clarity between our groups, and that's kind of what we're looking for this assignment. Now moving forward, we need to look a little bit at drawing. It's gone a little wide on the far side of his face. Through here we're getting messing up a little bit, but we're getting some anatomy and things like that coming through. And then his chin, if I look at it, that shadow falls underneath this eye, and so I can see, you know, his face is at this kind of extreme angle, and so I'm just trying to pull it back and help me get that. Okay. A little more forehead. And then I can get a little bit more anatomy happening through here, and then soften the edge. Okay. So pulling that drawing back into perspective there is helping. Putting in a dark middle to help me render form. I have to, once I set my group and I know the general value, now I can come in and find the extremes of that group. So I have my darker middle, and once I get my dark middle, then I find my lighter middle, which can be this one, and then between them I can render all the form that's in that group. So we see this chin, we see, you know, bits of anatomy on the neck. We get the sternocleidomastoid muscle coming down. I get a core shadow on the cheek. Probably soften it. And then I get a little bit more interest through these groups right here, through this area, I mean. And then I get part of the dark group in the ear. Dark group in the ear. As you can see, even though that the ear is, you know, is largely in the middle group, within it there are parts of other groups. So those small shapes then go into those other groups, and it helps me to bring that complexity. But initially, we want to try to avoid that subtlety, because it throws us off because of tunnel vision. We're getting the nose alignment is underneath the tear duct, and so we can get it to where it goes like this a little bit more, I think. It'll be a little bit closer, and then we can put in just a little bit more of a value separation. That nose is in between, or that side of the nose is in between the dark and light groups, so I can probably show a little bit more form by doing that. probably get a little bit more of a core shadow here. And then darken up that whole light portion of the dark group. Okay. And then we're getting in here a little bit of a lighter area, and then his forehead can probably come back just a little bit. That means all his hair can come back too. Something along those lines. And then we get a little bit of, you're seeing the structure of his mouth, but I think you're over, or kind of characterizing the up and down differences in his mouth. So, where it goes up, you made it higher, and then where it goes down, you made it lower, and so it's producing a little bit of a caricatured version of his mouth, which can be cool, but if you overdo it, it'll make him look sad, or it'll not look quite right. Something like that. We can get a dark accent underneath his lip, and then maybe soften and round out a little bit of that. Okay. Probably looking at the connection of this collar, I think we can raise the collar so it's just below his chin, and this is quite a bit lower. So I think we can raise his shoulder up here, and then this one maybe can go down, but then this collar goes up. And then we need a little bit more of a separation between his neck and collar, and then I want the dark parts of this shirt to be feel more in shadow. So I might do something like this. I'll just pull it back. I'm just doing this quickly in Photoshop, but I might do something like that so it feels a little bit more like it's in the middle group. It's sort of a light middle. That just feels a little bit more like light and shadow to me. And then the collar, you gave him like an Elvis collar, which is cool, but I feel like it's smaller. Let's get a full opacity here. So just smaller through there. And looks like this can probably be a little bit bigger. And then we can get a little bit more of a dark underneath his eye. Something like that. So anyway, probably lower his sideburns. And then darken the top portion of this ear a little bit. Okay. I don't think I need to go too much further. That's a lot of changes. But really what we're looking at is just more contrast in your groups. It's not always the, you don't always want contrast, but by getting that contrast, you get a lot of clarity about what's happening in terms of light and shadow and your groups. And so something I'd have you shoot for. So going back to the beginning, oops, too far. Back to the beginning to where I think it could go. It's just a little more contrast, and then working on some drawing could get it looking a little bit more of a likeness, and then at the same time a little bit more clarity in those groups. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions, and let's go on to the next one. And then we're to Meera. Meera, this is looking good. It looks a little unfinished though. It looks like a vignette, which is cool. But in terms of the background, unless it is, it's not black and white, so that's kind of out of the spectrum of the assignment. It's nice to have that though. It looks really, really nice to have like a transparent, washy background and a figure. That's why I do it so much. But it doesn't quite fit, so it feels a little unfinished, like it could be taken further. You could add some different value contrast behind that. But looking at it, the drawing looks pretty good. You're getting a pretty good likeness out of it. The groups feel pretty good separated, but there is a little bit there's a little bit too much contrast in them. So like within the dark group, it feels a little bit like there's too many lights, and in the middle group, it feels a little bit too broken up. And so the goal is to try to find your groups, and then you can add extra information into them, but a lot of times it can't break up that group. And so if I find this dark group again, just to show you, dark group, dark group, dark group, dark group through here. So this would feel much more like the dark group. And the photo's giving me that information, but I think in life you'd probably see it a little bit more like this, but even that is a little bit more grouped than what was there. So you can see now I'm getting definite darks. There's lights and middles and darks within them. But really I'm trying to do is get all of my values within that group to read as being separate than my other groups. And so once I establish that group, I can then go in and establish my middle group. And you're doing very nice. I mean, it's looking really good in terms of the values that you were seeing, but the idea of the value matrix and the idea of finding these value groups is to bring clarity. So even though I'm seeing the values, like you're seeing them, and I want to paint them that way, I push it more to get that sense of clarity. And so let's put this in real quick, and we'll see if we can make a little bit clearer group out of the mids. So go like this. Okay, and I'm going to make it a little bit lighter. Oh, wrong way. A little bit lighter. So I want it to separate from the darks, but I want it to separate from the lights as well. Okay. A little bit more separation. Maybe I can pull it back a little bit more. Trying to group. And then with the light group, I think, now I don't know what, it looks like you're getting pretty close to white in there. But I wonder if we can push it to separate it even more. I wonder if we can push it just a bit brighter. Finding everywhere where the light group is, squinting down and trying to group them together. Then pulling it back a little bit. There we go. So just a little bit more drama between them. It's going to help to give a little bit more of a statement. But then also within rendering them, we're going to try to eliminate a little bit of the little bits of noise that we're seeing in there. So, but to do that, I think we also need a little bit of a background. And personally, I'd probably go with like a darker middle value. Now it's not completely necessary to have a background, but in this case, if I'm trying to build a little of clarity towards a particular group, it will help. And generally, the light or the shadow is the subject, and if I just put in something here, and then I can show you the difference quickly. So we put in something here. We put in a little bit of a background. Let's put in something. Okay, so if I do something like this, the subject of the painting is far more about this light group. That's kind of what it's metered for that light group, and that's kind of nice because our eyes are located in that group. If I meter it this way, let me erase this one. If I meter it this way, it's definitely more about these dark groups as we read. So that's not necessarily the answer here, but it's an idea that you can take. So it's more about these light groups, and then it's more about these dark groups, because that's just what reads first. But let's keep going. Let's add a little bit more of a range within our groups. So within all of our middle group, you can see that there's some aspects of the dark group. So if I take this dark here and I push it into this eye socket, that's going to really give a little bit more contrast in there, and that's going to be important. And then on the bottom plane of his nose, I'll send that dark as well, so I'm getting a dark accent in there. Also see that dark comes into this other socket, and I don't want it to be super contrasting, but I do want a little bit more contrast in it because it was kind of getting lost in that sort of nothing value background, so that sort of light background. Now in terms of drawing, we also need to raise the level of the mouth a little bit on this side. And then it looks like we can do a little bit more precision work on the chin here. Looks almost straight up and down, which will help to get a little bit more of a likeness. Now this is probably closer to a lighter group through here. And this goes. So it's like a dark light versus a light mid. And then we can get just a little bit more contrast within our middle group as well. So we can send that on that chin, send that on that jaw, send that up. Taking it further as well, I'd also try to eliminate some of the, I don't know if it's just over painting, I don't really know what it's called, but the over modeling of some of this form. So it goes like there's a lot of value shifts within the group, and so it kind of starts making his skin feel a little bit like a lizard or something. And so I try to eliminate it a little bit by, evening out a little bit of that tone. And that will help to make him feel like, the skin, the actual surface of skin is soft. And so if I model it that way, meaning that the value transitions I put in it are relatively soft, that will help to make it feel like it's innate quality. I need a softer brush because I'm kind of I'm doing the same thing with the values that I just said not to do. There you go. Okay. And it looks like I'm kind of messing up the drawing a little bit here. So, anyway, so you get the picture. So trying to even out a few of those tones a little bit will help that neck to feel a little bit more like skin. Now his nose is getting quite large too. I wonder what's happening there. His eyes are coming down, so I think this eye should go down a bit further and in a little bit. To get that tilt of his head. And then the nose, I think, could go At least the shadow down here could go up a little bit. Something like this, and then that will leave a little bit more room for the mouth, meaning that I can move up the lower lip and the upper lip. It starts to work a little bit better for me. Okay. Something along those lines. So that's starting to feel a little bit better, pulling it into that range, and it can sometimes be drastic when I combine all those little changes together and then look at them before and after. It can make a difference, and so sometimes it's not that big of a difference. Sometimes it's kind of shocking when I make all those little tiny changes, and it changes the whole character of the face. Like that to there, just feels like a whole totally different person, I think. And so that's why it pays just to take your time, try to pay really close attention to the painting as a whole. That can really pay off. You can also soften some of these edges, so I'm seeing it where it goes really soft on his nose and then through there. So it's kind of what I look at. So going at the beginning to the end, I'm trying to just get more value separation, and correcting drawing and a little bit of edge. That's really all it is. So just looking to separate my groups a little bit more to get that clarity, and then through that clarity I can find my form modeling, quieting down some of this texture, and then correcting a little bit of drawing or trying to get it closer. It'll pay off in the long run. I can also soften a little bit of the brow and soften a little bit of the nose through here. And we get a little something like that. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. It was a really nice painting. I mean, it is a nice painting. These are just some suggestions to take it to the next level. So let's go on to the next one. This is the last one. This is Morgan. I believe this is the last one. So Morgan, nice painting, black and white. You got the value groups looking good. Getting some nice separations, which is awesome. So that's what I'm looking for. In terms of drawing, it needs some work though. Particularly his nose. His nose got way big on you. Let's just take a look at it. So let's draw with a red. So if I look at it and I just outline the nose down to the eye, down to the corner of the nose, and let's actually include the shadow. There we go. And then I look at this nose, from the bridge of the nose to the corner of the eye, down here to the shadow. Just looking at it as a simple shape, you actually have a pretty good shape to it, which is awesome. That's actually better than I thought. And the shape is actually quite a bit closer. We do see some different, a little bit different characteristic. I think yours is a little more straight on. This one's looking up at it a little bit, but the main thing I'm looking at is the proportion of the shape to the rest of the head. And so let's do one more on the forehead in light. Let's do the forehead in light here. Oh, and I guess his bangs probably did move, so we can go up through here. Let's see how these relate together. So each of these, what I'm really looking at is the specific shape of exactly what's happening in these. I'm getting a different character, of course, because of the hair, it kind of moved. But I'm getting a different character out of this shape of the forehead and the shape of the nose. So they're actually looking quite good. But overall, I think the proportion is just a little off. So let's see if we can pull it back into a range. So the shape is looking good. But let's see if we can pull it back a little bit. I think maybe it's this bottom portion of the nose more than anything. So let's see. Let's first start by fixing the forehead. And that aligns with the front of the eye. So there's something wrong here. So if I look here, and this aligns with the very front of the eye almost perfectly. And that's where his hair and forehead meet. And then here we're getting it quite a bit off. And so that tells me that probably, and it's even more off if I hadn't done the paint over. So, but that tells me that, you know what, I think that it's the eye is too far back. So if I move this eye forward, let's see if we can do that. If I move it forward here, it's not going to be, you know, I can't just move it all the way forward to get it into alignment. I'm going to have to correct the forehead. The shape was a little bit off, but we start to see the relationship of the nose changing to the rest of the face. And so this is a quick alignment that I'm doing, right? So the forehead has to be back here, and then we drop this down, and then we drop the forehead down here. And what we start to see is a clearer way forward in terms of getting the proportions and the shapes a little bit closer to where they need to be. It doesn't quite look it now, but I'm sure that it will help to correct itself here in a little bit. So let's grab this middle value and redraw with it as well. Out the nose, and then we get this front portion, and it drops down, and the alignment on the nose is out in front of the eye. And then we get a smaller cast shadow, I believe. And then I think I can probably shave off a bit of length. And the trick to most of this is using those methods for achieving proportion. So alignment being the second one, you know, aligning the eye with the forehead, that's a little one, but then it told me a lot about the placement of the eye. And since I could find the placement of the eye, that helped me find the placement of the nose. It's not enough just to look at the alignment of, you know, the eye to the nose and just go with it. You have to look at the alignment of the nose and then how it aligns with something like the forehead. And that will start helping you to start getting things closer in proportion. Also, the size of the nose, something about the size of the nose to the size of the height to width of it just didn't quite feel right to me. And so let's see if we can't pull. Now that I've changed all these, I have to change everything else with it. Just give me a second to run through here and just make these changes. You can group all these together. And then the alignment on the chin going straight up is behind the forehead. And so since I moved the forehead back, I have to move the chin back. And we get it a little bit closer there. I'm still not happy with the drawing, and I think it might have to do with this shape now. You might hear my baby crying in the background. I'm sorry about that. Babies cry. Just trying to pull those relationships back into alignment, trying to get it just closer. I think, you know, the fact that the hair fell down is good, but I think since we're working from a photo, I would try to stick a little bit closer to the photo because it will tell me if I get the forehead right or wrong just based off of that shape. So I'm going to try to group that, and then I think we can drop down and reduce the contrast in the neck back here. And I think you gave him a little bit of a small neck. Through there. And I think maybe I gave him a little bit of a small nose. Try to correct and pull it back out. And so that angle on his forehead can probably tilt back a little bit. And then I want to re-establish this dark group. And I think, just looking at it, that the ear needs to go back more. And then this, well, I guess that's not dark group, but can come back. Okay, maybe taking the back of his head, making it a little bit bigger. Pulling his head back into proportion. So the real trick here, I think, is, using your observational tools, using your methods for achieving proportion, but also trusting your eyes in order to get the general feel of all these shapes. So really, as I'm going through here, I'm almost doing like a spot the difference, spot the differences between the shapes and trying to pull them back in. And I'm constantly shifting between size, angle, and position. But really, the main ones are size and position that I'm trying to nail down most accurately. You get the inside of the ear, which is it's just dark, but maybe not that dark. And we put that ear back there, and we can get his sideburns in a little bit more accurately. Something like that. It looks like maybe these shapes can be better formed through there. Okay. And then I think you can do a little bit more observation on something like a shirt. It feels like a just sort of simplified version of the shirt. I think if you take more time and measure it out, I'm not going to go too far with it here, but if you take some more time and measure it out, you can get a little bit more believability in that shirt. And then I think we can probably get away with a little bit bigger of a chin. Is that possible? I think it just goes... He's got a big chin on him, but I think just change the shape down there, it'll get a little bit closer to what he's looking like. You get upper lid, you get lower lid, the white of the eye, the darks are combining. Should probably zoom in, but that's okay. So I soften this out and then look for the really soft edges up on the rest of his face. Looks like we can probably move his mouth up more too still. Looking at it, and we can probably do a little bit more drawing in there. Yeah, so there's some specifics. I'm getting really kind of nitpicky with the drawing, but really that's what it breaks down to, is taking the time and processing every shape as being important. If you start doing that, your drawing will get better and better, and your portraits will take on more a feeling of life. If I just slow down and I pay attention and I accentuate the areas that make him an individual, and I subdue areas that aren't helping, that's all what, it's all a decision process, but it's all important. So, slowing down, getting the shape of his forehead, and doing all that. So anyway, I won't go any further with this, here I am going further, but those are the main ideas that I'm looking at. So looking at it, I think it was mainly just a thing of drawing. Overall, I think you did really nice in terms of the value breakdown, the value groups, and everything. But it really came down to drawing more than anything. And now doing it digitally, I lose some texture and I lose some really fun painterly stuff. But really, it's just a matter of refining those shapes, taking the time, and trying to get it as close as you can get to the drawing. I think if I were to take it further, again, all I would do is continue going through and trying to refine the edge and shape. I'm trying to get the more precise shape. The more I paint, the more precise my shapes get, and the more precise my shapes get, the more it looks like him. So I can add a little bit of eyebrow here and something like that. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. That's really good. And yeah, I think that's the last one. So thank you, everyone. If you watched the full critique, I appreciate it. Let me know if you have any questions. And yeah, I'll see you next week in class.